And welcome once again, my friends, to the next episode here of the Red Delta Project podcast, live feed Q&A, helping you be fit and live free by taking a fundamental approach to diet and exercise. I'm Matt Schifferly, and today's episode is sponsored by all of the resources listed down below that we're going to be talking all about for building more muscle with Grind Style Calisthenics. This is the brand of calisthenics training that I developed probably more over 5-6 years ago or so, with the specific purpose of using bodyweight training for helping you build more muscle and strength. Because at the time, I was kind of feeling like the path that most calisthenics training took was a little bit more along the lines of like skills and I wouldn't say like the circus tricks and stuff like that, but it wasn't the most conducive and direct approach towards building muscle. Like if you came to me and said, okay, Matt, I want to use bodyweight training because I like the freedom, I like the independence, I like the simplicity of it. But my primary goal is I want to build some muscle and improve my physique. Well, if that was your goal, I wouldn't go about many of the common approaches that I was coming across when it came to calisthenics, because a lot of it was, here's how to get your first handstand, or here's how to do a muscle up, and or here's how to do 100 push-ups at once and stuff. And not that that stuff is bad or that you wouldn't build muscle on that sort of type of training, because you certainly can, but it's kind of more of a roundabout way of going about it, which is one of the common things that I find a lot of people fall fault of or victim of with a lot of things when it comes to things in fitness, in our fitness culture. It's just this very detoured, roundabout, overcomplicated, overexpensive, overbuilt type of approaches. You know, when people are talking about, what about this program? And I look at it and it's like, there are 8 different pull-up variations. Or when they're saying, I want to build muscle, but how do I get my first muscle up? It's like, you're going in a different direction here, because developing a program and trying to build up your body for the sake of performance is somewhat different than trying to build your body up for the sake of aesthetics. So today we're going to be talking about some of the advantages and why Grind Style Calisthenics was developed with the purpose of helping you build the muscle and the physique that you want. And of course, as always, I'll be answering your questions and entertaining your thoughts. And I hope to get to everybody. As a reminder, put a hey Matt in the comment section so I know that's something that is directed towards me. So let's jump right down to it and talk brass tacks. When you're training for the sake of want to build up muscle, I want to build up my body here, what are the things that are most important? And the 2 most important things is, number 1 is consistency. Bottom line, you just don't have much of a chance if your training is wildly inconsistent. And by that, I mean, the common thing that I see most people do is like, well, you know, I started working out and I did it for a month or 2. And then, you know, life kind of got in the way. And I kind of, instead of going 3 times a week or 4 times a week to the gym, then went down to once a week. And then I took a break for this vacation. And then this thing came up at work. And then I got serious again. But I decided, instead of what I was doing before, I'm going to do high volume stuff. And that was great for, again, maybe 2, 3, 4 months. And then I changed things up again. It's just all over the place, wildly inconsistent. When it comes to getting the best results in anything in fitness and in life, we want to be utilizing methodology that we can apply most any time, regardless of our circumstances. And that's one of the reasons that led me to really kind of favor and choose calisthenics training to begin with, is because I always felt like life just kept getting in the way when I was doing the typical go to the gym, have a 5-part body building style split, very high maintenance style programs that required me to be in the gym maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours every single day, very strict diet and stuff. All of this was effective to a degree, but I couldn't dedicate that kind of time and energy and resources towards ensuring that my lifestyle stayed intact. Life just kept getting in the way. So I've always kind of had this mindset, this awareness in the back of my mind of, even when things are going crazy, can you still train? Even when you can't get to gyms or you don't have a lot of time, can you still get your training in? Because the only way any of us stand any chance of not only achieving our physique, but also maintaining it, is if we adopt habits that are relatively easy to maintain, no matter what life is throwing at us. But if we come to the table saying, all right, As long as I've got all of my ducks in a row, I've got the time and I've got the motivation and I've got the equipment and I've got the energy and I've got the resources and all these other things, as long as I've got everything in my life kind of in alignment with this, then I can have a good chance. It's like, that's probably not going to be a good way to go about it. It's probably not going to be something that you can maintain or sustain for months or even years on end, because that is what is required. So one of the beautiful things about bodyweight training in general is we don't need a gym. We don't need complicated equipment. We don't need long workouts. We don't need overcomplicated workout programs and gadgets and gizmos and all these other things that can put a lot of high maintenance requests and requirements on our training. And I've got my pull-up bar right behind me. That's technically all I need, is just something that I can pull on. And of course, you've got your floor and you've got the wall that you can do things like handstands and things like that on. So as long as you've got a place to hang, you're good. You're ready to rock and roll. And you don't even need something as complicated as like the dash behind me where you're mounting it to the wall. You can use like the Dynamic doorway pull-up handles that I always recommend. The link again down below is that. And things that you can find in the park, a pull-up bar you can find in the park, or a suspension setup or something. I get asked questions all the time. It's like, what do I do if for working my back and my biceps and stuff when I don't have a pull-up bar or something I can pull on? And the answer is you either make one, find one, or build one, or buy one, because there's simply not going to be a substitute for not having a good place to hang when it comes to bodyweight training. So that's really all that you need. So the requirements are so much lower, giving you the great advantage of that consistency. And when you have that and you can keep training regularly for months and years on end, your ability to build up a better physique just skyrockets. So that's one of the biggest advantages of Grind Style Calisthenics with building muscle, is its simplicity and autonomy. And we'll build that as our foundation right off the bat. Let me see if I can get to some good questions here, though, right off the bat. Is S. Lee is saying, hi, Matt, is it beneficial to make a habit to use thick bars for pull-ups and other bodyweight exercises? It may be, but it depends on the circumstances. So the thicker your bar is, the more challenging it's going to be to your grip. And that's great for especially building up your forearms. But as I addressed in a video I made about a week ago or so, that if you are doing an exercise and there's a very noticeable weak link, like for example with pull-ups, a lot of people find their grip is a weak link, then if you are using a device that further challenges your grip, that will make your grip stronger. But there is the risk that it's going to further inhibit your ability to adequately train other muscles in the chain. So if you're always finding that your grip is always giving out well before the rest of the muscles in your back and your shoulders and your biceps are giving out, then the thick bar may be something that is going to kind of hold you back a little bit. So use it as an augmentation thing. Use it as something that you can play around with. You may want to look into something like the fat grips, or something that you can add onto the pull-up bar and then take them off. So that way you're not using a dedicated thick or fat bar all the time, but you have a thinner bar and a fatter bar for when you're feeling like, I want to really challenge my grip. No, right now I don't want my grip to be really that much challenged, because like a lot of times people will find that they can't use many of the progressive techniques like commando pull-ups or one-handed pull-ups where you're grabbing your wrist, just because the grip strength is just not there. So it could be something that impedes you if you are too dependent on it. So use it wisely for a selective approach of, I want to really challenge my grip with this, versus I don't want my grip to be necessarily the weak link in my pull chain exercise for today. Gorist Fump is coming in. Good to see you. Hey, Matt, that guy that used to go to the gym, same gym as you, who just did pull-ups and dips, Mark, was it? Yes, his name was Mark, would be the ultimate guest on this podcast. Amen to that. I mean, I haven't seen or talked to anything heads or tails of Mark in almost 20 years now. So good luck, I guess, finding him, because he was a bit of a vagabond when he was there. I think part of the reason why he had the gym membership was to make use of the shower and just have a clean place where he could do laundry and stuff. So I don't have any contact information. Of course, back then, it was also before smartphones really were kind of a thing. So to just go up to somebody and be like, hey man, can I take pictures with you, or can I get your contact information and stuff, would have been a really weird thing. It wasn't like it is now, where you can just take a photo on your phone or something. Yeah, I was using like a flip phone at the time, and the case then was, well, you could take a photo on your phone, but what are you going to do with it? Like, you couldn't upload it to the web or anything. It was a 2 megapixel photo, grainy as hell kind of thing. So it really wasn't that conducive. It would have been weird to try to get more in touch with Mark at the time. But I totally agree. You would be the ultimate guest on these sorts of things. It would be very good to talk to him. I wonder what he's up to these days. I hope he's well. I hope he's doing good. Aladdin saying opinion on grip crushers. I'm building forearms and improving grip. I bought one last week, 200 pounds. Quite enjoy using it throughout the day. Very good. Yeah, you mentioned the convenience of it. You're just there and you're squeezing. Personally, I've never been able to feel like those things work my forearms very well. I never could get the hang of those things. I would start using them and play around with it, and it always felt like my hand would get tired, but I never felt it in my forearm. Maybe I wasn't using it very well. Maybe it wasn't something that I felt I was using as far as the proper technique or something. I just never felt like it was doing what it needed to do. And I think part of that is because when we're working our grip, especially our forearms, it's not just the opening and closing of the fingers, but rather the flexion of the wrist and kind of a bit of the closing of the palm. And I always found that when we're going with the heavy captains of crush or crush grippers, we typically put the hands or the metal pieces on the inside of the fingers rather than the fingertips. Same thing near the thumb. So we're applying more leverage to it, which allows us to exert more force, but it doesn't necessarily get as much on the forearm versus something like, grabbing fingertip holds at a climbing gym or something. And we're flexing our wrists in order to grab onto these things. That's just my experience. I mean, obviously go with whatever you experience. If you're getting insane forearm pumps by using those sorts of tools, then go for it. Awesome, wonderful. But I just never felt like they just did anything very effective other than just made me really good at crushing, my hand open and closed. And captain of grip, I'm screwing up the brand names here. But I just never felt like I could get what I wanted out of them. So that was my experience with it. But who cares what my experience was? But because always remember that you gain that which you challenge when it comes to exercise. So you're challenging your ability to open and close your hands. So how applicable is that to your goals? And then one more before continuing on, Sniff Rat saying, hey man, I could do 25 dips. So I need a more difficult variant. Can you give me some ideas? Cheers from England. Always good to talk to you, man. So dips are one of those things that I've never really used a whole lot on progressive technique, like progressive push-ups, for example. When we're looking at progressive technique, we're looking at more of the horizontal stuff. Dips are kind of a little bit more static. I know the Cavadlo brothers have some books that they go into a little bit more of some progressive technique things where, you're keeping your legs out in front of you to some degree, kind of like an L-sit style dip. You can always look at range of motion. I also usually recommend doing dips on rings or suspension straps, which I much more prefer, just because the ergonomics are much more comfortable. And that's because the stability requirements make the dips harder as well. So usually I'll recommend go with a big range of motion, nice and deep, put a pause at the bottom, have rings or suspension straps. Those are good ways to make it harder. But yeah, at the end of the day, I'm usually saying buy a dip belt. Weighted dips are awesome. They're wonderful. As long as you, of course, know what you're doing. The goal of any weighted calisthenics is not to lift weight, because no one ever got stronger by lifting weight. You get stronger by creating more muscle tension. And if you're compromising things like your stability, your scapular control, your range of motion and stuff in order to lift the weight, then you're compromising the very thing, which is muscle tension, that's going to give you the results that you're after in the first place. So usually I'll recommend using weighted dips over any sort of progressive technique most of the time. You can also go with straight bar dips too. That's also a good way to level up your dip game as well. And for Federico, it's good to see you. Hey, Matt, do you feel that with age, it takes you longer to recover? It can. It certainly can. But always remember that when it comes to your recovery, there are so many other variables in play. There's your current stress level. There's your just general busyness, what you're doing mentally, emotionally, physically. So if you're going crazy, trying to put out fires at work all day, that's going to impede recovery. A lot of times when people are like, well, I get older, I'm not going to recover nearly as quickly or as well. A lot of times it's just because their life is more stressful. Life is a lot more hectic and chaotic as we're getting older than when you were younger, for example. I mean, hell, when I got out of college, life was so ridiculously simple. I had so much more free time that I recovered like that. And it wasn't because I was younger. It was just because I was able to sleep in every day. I was able to eat very well. But sometimes life just gets very chaotic and it can impede recovery there. So yeah, age certainly is a variable. It is an influence to our recovery and our health and fitness. But I would say it's more likely that other variables are probably more of a collective influence to that recovery, which is why I'm always telling people recover as needed or rest as needed, both in between sets and in between workouts, because everybody's recovery needs are different and they're always changing as well. So any sort of static recovery recommendation, like wait 3 days before working a body part again or something, is just basically a general guideline. It's certainly nothing that's set in stone. So whenever you're working your muscles, I always tell people, work it pretty hard, and just work it again whenever you feel that you can bring a good amount of energy and intensity to the muscle again. If that happens in 24 hours, great. If you need a week and a half, great, do that. Listen to your body and give it the amount of recovery it needs. And that way you're not guessing at how much you need and basing it off of arbitrary things like age or how many sets you did or what your diet is like and so on, because then it becomes much more of a guessing game. Dan Osek is saying, hey, Matt, been doing isomax deadlifts, very good, about knee level, and having lower back pain for days afterwards. Well, that's not good. Would love to keep the exercise since it's a great compound exercise. Maybe change the angle? Yeah, certainly you can change the angle. You can also make sure that your lats are really engaged, because a lot of times with that isometric deadlift, especially, anything in the lower back is usually a sign your lats aren't on nearly as much. That should be very much considered a lat exercise. Let your hips kind of lean back a little bit. Remember, you want to feel the muscles engaging before you're really applying a lot of force into the handle. So when you are in the deadlift position, you want to get your shoulders packed. You want to feel your lats light right up. You want to have your shoulders down away from your ears. And you want to make sure your glutes and your hamstrings are really, really contracted. And then you ramp up the intensity. And if you're going too hard and you're overloading like your stability in your lats, for example, then you're probably going to need to back off just a little bit. You may also want to go with a shorter time duration as well, because I've noticed that a lot of times people will have a degradation in their technique and the tension control if they're holding for 10, 15, 20 seconds. I usually keep the deadlifts to about that 6-second mark that they talk about in the Overcoming Isometrics manual. Christopher, it's good to talk to you again as always. Hey man, I limit myself to 2 work sets, but have added 2 drop sets for each set to increase fatigue. Yes, I found that my second set significantly lowers in reps. Should I drop the second work set? Not necessarily, because remember, the whole point of those drop sets is to burn yourself out. And so when you are doing your 2 work sets, first off, I'm assuming you're kind of doing a couple of things to warm up a little bit before that. So when you're doing your 2 work sets, usually people will get 2 good hard work sets to begin with, unless you're really saving a little bit in the tank. So if you're doing like a 5x5, that doesn't mean that you're lifting at a level of resistance that you're maxing out at 5. You're lifting, especially the first couple of sets, of 5 repetitions when you could have probably gotten 8, 9, or 10 repetitions and so on. So yeah, having a decrease is perfectly fine. It's safe. And you can probably go with something that has a little bit more resistance to it and just not quite as many repetitions. So in the Grind Style program, we have our strength phase and then we have our hypertrophy phase, which is very similar to what you have, where you're working on strength and then you're working on your fatigue. And the whole point of that strength phase is you're not burning out the muscle. You are working well within failure. Well, you're not trying to see how many you can do. In fact, when it comes to a lot of the strength phase stuff, people will say, well, I do like 5 repetitions. I'm like, yeah, great, good. Like when I'm doing my commando pull-ups and stuff, it's like I do 3 to 5 reps. A year from now, I'm still going to be doing 3 to 5 reps. I'm never increasing that repetition range. I'm only increasing the resistance. So when it comes to your work sets, you may be just pushing a little bit too hard on the volume, and you're turning that into a bit more of a finisher phase. We want to have the stimulus you're creating very different between the two. They shouldn't feel the same. When you're doing your work sets, they ideally should feel very heavy, but they're not draining you quite that quickly. And if when you do your hypertrophy stuff, your finisher, that's when you're draining yourself on out. So maybe just save a couple reps in the tank for those strength phases and go just a little bit heavier would be a good way to go about it. But it's still worth doing if you're feeling like you're not bringing as much to the table. It's not like you need a certain number of repetitions in order for it to quote unquote count. Joseph Bellows coming on saying, Matt, I have your body weight for martial arts book. Thank you for the support. I was wondering if I should get your Grind Style book. So Grind Style is all about muscle and strength from bodyweight training, if that's your goal. Bodyweight training for martial arts, that's all about using bodyweight training for really kind of being able to supplement your training for the capabilities you need as a martial artist, the isometrics, the power, the explosiveness, that sort of thing. So it's using bodyweight training for different objectives. It just boils down to, what is your objective? If you don't really care too much about building muscle and augmenting your physique and stuff, then the bodyweight for martial arts book will still more than cover you, and you don't need the GSC book. All right, back on topic here. Building more muscle with Grind Style Calisthenics. The first thing that I talked about was the consistency. Now, the other variables that we need are progression and intensity. And by intensity, I mean technical intensity, classic intensity. A lot of times when people talk about intensity with exercise, they kind of get it a little bit screwed up, because when we talk about strength training, intensity is the percentage of essentially your 1 rep max. So if I took a pair of like 10-pound dumbbells and I just started curling them for like an hour, and then after like that hour, I'm really struggling and my biceps feel like they're going to blow apart and it's really a hard effort. That's a effort of intensity of effort, but that's not actual intensity. That's not what we're talking about. That's actually very low intensity training, because it's only 10 pounds. I could just do hundreds of repetitions. So if you can do something, let's say 100 push-ups, and on that last push-up, you're screaming bloody murder to get it, that's still low intensity training. That's not intensity. That's just intensity of effort. And anything can be intensity of effort if you do enough of it. I remember when I was 17, I went and did a kind of a walking tour of the city of Kyoto in Japan. And I walked on my feet. I was like on my feet for like 13 straight hours or something. And at the end of that, I was so exhausted, I could barely climb the stairs to the hotel afterwards. I felt like I had run a marathon. Was that intensity? Nope, absolutely not. That was just me driving myself into the ground. And that's another big mistake that a lot of people make when they're trying to build muscle with bodyweight training, is they've got way too much of this volume sort of thing. Because remember, if you don't have a lot of intensity, you have to make up for it with volume to some degree. And so when we're talking about Grind Style Calisthenics, one of the great things about it is the 4 modalities that makes it a lot easier to bring a lot more intensity to the muscle. You've got isometrics, which you're never going to get more intense than isometrics. That's always going to be the gold standard for intensity in strength training, because you can just go as hard as you possibly can. You have progressive calisthenics, which gives you the ability to load up a lot of resistance on the muscles that you're working through just a shift in body weight. So that gives you control to really, really load up. Like today I was working with a guy on archer push-ups, and I told him, I was like, you're going to do 3 repetitions, and I want you to always have the intensity high enough that 3 repetitions is a pretty good challenge. If you could do 8 of these, it's too light. You're not working with enough intensity, because we're focusing on the strength aspect of things at that point. So you can just simply shift yourself a little bit over from one side to the other, or using leverage, and that makes it very easy to access a large degree of resistance, which therefore can correlate to a good degree of intensity. And then, of course, you have the weighted calisthenics. Weighted calisthenics means that you can add a lot of resistance to an exercise, and you don't need to necessarily improve upon the softer skill-based things, the stability, the mobility, the things that are required for progressive calisthenics to work. So if you think of progressive and weighted calisthenics as two sides to the same coin, which is why my latest book, Progressive and Weighted Calisthenics, they kind of complement each other. Each one has its pros and cons. So when we're looking for intensity and we're only doing progressive or weighted calisthenics, we're basically limiting our ability to access intensity as easily as possible, because there's reasons why weighted calisthenics is a lot easier for intensity. There's reasons why it's not easier. Same with progressive calisthenics. It's easier in some ways, harder in others. So if you have both, then you have the ability to access a very high level of intensity and you have no downsides. And then, of course, your final discipline of GSC is the suspension calisthenics, using suspension straps or rings. And this gives you a little bit more of a bodybuilding approach, where you can do single joint stuff like bicep curls, tricep extensions, shoulders, chest flies, things like that. And that's just to put the little bit of the cherry on top, because sometimes when we're trying to build up a particular muscle group like the chest, due to other limiting factors or stability or skill or whatever, we're just not going to be able to bring the intensity we need to the muscle with our conventional compound movements. It's just, for whatever reason, it's just not happening for you right now. The skill isn't there, the stability is not there, the tension control, who knows why. But sometimes one of the best ways to build up a muscle group is to use a bit more of a single joint bodybuilding approach. And that's what suspension calisthenics gives you. So due to all four of those disciplines, you now have a hell of a lot easier time to access a lot of intensity for your muscles, which makes it a lot easier to push the muscles, a lot harder on the intensity side of things. But you also have the advantage of being a relatively comfortable discipline too. It's relatively safe, it's relatively stable. You don't need a spotter if you're doing heavy weighted dips on gymnastics rings and stuff. So what that also gives you is the ability to push your muscles to a very high level of fatigue. So you combine those two things of a lot of intensity with the potential to comfortably get a lot of fatigue, and now you've made it a lot easier to push your muscles to a much higher level in both strength and endurance, which is correlated very strongly with the ability to build muscle as a whole. So the GSC system, using all four of those disciplines, gives you the options to work in the way that's best for you. So that way you're not feeling like, I keep using, this type of calisthenics approach and it's pretty good, but I feel like it's lacking in some areas. It creates a much more of a full holistic system. All right, let's get to some more questions here. I know folks have been coming in. James Woods, it's good to talk to you as always. Hey, Matt, is training push-pull squat twice a week a good place to start? Sure, absolutely. Just get the work in. When we think about programming, the only thing we need to do is, can you get the work in? And are you able to push to higher levels of performance over time? I don't care how you work out. I don't care how many times you work a muscle. It really isn't all that important. The important things are, what can you stick with and what can you recover from, so that way you're bringing a little bit more to the table, hopefully, with each workout over time. Will that happen every time? Of course not. You're going to have workouts where you're still a little behind the eight ball. You're going to have weeks, months, hell, even years. If your training career is long enough, you're going to have years where you're not really on the ball. But when it comes to your actual programming and stuff, usually hitting 2-3 times a week or so, just getting the work in, is a good place to begin with, and then just program your workouts accordingly. It's amazing how much a lot of the details when it comes to programming and working out and stuff aren't really that important, because when we understand fundamentally what we need intensity, we need progression, we need consistency. All of the other details are basically, well, how would those details improve those variables, those objectives? And if they don't really seem to have any say in it, then it's really not something to worry too much about. All right, Tim Neat coming on saying, hey, Matt, do you still recommend the use of neurosets from Neuromass? Yeah, that's basically what GSC's turned into, was the Neuromass sets were using something with high intensity isometric, then explosiveness. You're basically changing your neural activation of your muscles. So that inspiration from the Neuromass sets is what GSC morphed into, is going with something where you have an isometric warm-up, then you've got shift work for stability, then you've got very heavy stuff with a low level of fatigue for building up the skill of strength, and then you have your finisher phase, which is just blasting it out with a high degree of fatigue, usually more on the endurance side of things, more high rep style training to finish things off. So basically Neuromass is GSC and vice versa. It's a little bit different, but Neuromass is a good place to start with that as well. It's not something that is really all that different. Christopher coming on again saying, hey, Matt, I limit myself. Oh, sorry, I got that one already. My bad. Scusi. All right. Shout out to Vermont SL saying, go Vermont Bodyweight Bros. Yes, absolutely, man. Wonder how the 802 is doing these days. It might be in the ocean for all I know, with everything going on. It's hot though. I talked to my friend today who was from Vermont, and she was saying that it's getting hotter. It's getting hotter here in Denver as well, of course. But anyway, so we're looking at consistency. We're looking at intensity. The 4 disciplines of GSC kind of create a little bit more of a holistic approach than if you're just doing progressive calisthenics where you're adjusting things with your technique. Then it can be harder to access intensity in individual muscles. It can be harder to access intensity depending on where your skill and proficiency is at. Weighted calisthenics can be great, but it can be a little bit more limited as far as what type of exercise you're using. Typically, when it comes to weighted calisthenics, we're looking at something heavy for push, pull, and squat, usually weighted push-ups, pull-ups, dips, and lunges or squats. And that's typically where our weight is going to go. And that alone is going to do a lot. But when we're looking at developing the physique, we do need more than that, of course. So we're looking at intensity, we're looking at consistency, and then we have, of course, our programming that I kind of alluded to earlier, where we have our warm-up, because it's very important to get the nervous system ready to drive the muscles, because ultimately, remember, it's not the exercise that makes your muscles work hard. It's not the weight that makes your muscles work hard. Those are just the application for your muscle tension. The generation of muscle tension, which is what creates the stimulus for building up muscle and strength, comes from your nervous system. And we need that to level up over time. We need to get better at using our muscles. A lot of times, people who have a better physique, they have that physique purely because they have much better neuromuscular proficiency. So as I've always said, your neuromuscular proficiency is your foundation. You have that, almost anything you do will work to a fair degree. But if you don't have good neuromuscular proficiency, which most people don't, nothing you do will ever work. It doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter what program you use. It doesn't matter what exercise you use. If you have trouble engaging and pushing your lats, for example, on a neuromuscular level, you're just not going to build them up. There's just no way, because there's just no juice or very limited juice going to it. So that warm-up that is in GSC is all about priming up your nervous system to engage those muscles to a much higher degree over time. It's not just about warming up and preparing your muscles for the workout that's about to commence, although that's important. You want to get better at using your muscles over time. That's really the purpose of the GSC warm-up, is you should be able to engage and use and command control over your muscle tension more over time. Your warm-ups should be progressive. Your warm-ups should not be something that always feels like you're starting off in the same place. Just as if you're getting stronger, you should feel like, oh, I don't need this weight for my warm-up set. Like I used to warm up with incline push-ups. Now I can warm up with regular push-ups or even close push-ups, right? The level that you're starting off at should be increasing when you're warming up. So your warm-up should get progressively better over time. Then we have our strength phase. And again, that is for the generation of tension, a lot of tension. So the repetitions for that are always low. Like people are like, oh, strength phase, 15, 20 reps. No, that's not strength training. That's much more of an endurance. Yes, there's some degree of strength there, just as there is with anything that requires some degree of muscle tension. walking could be considered strength training because you're generating tension in your muscles for that. But when we're going into our strength phase or our skill phase, if you wanted to practice calisthenic skills, you are focusing on generating an ungodly amount of tension in the muscles. So you're looking at 3-5 repetitions-ish or so. And I always tell people, use whatever sets that you can. Use as many sets as you can get. Sometimes you're just not going to have as much energy in the tank, and you're going to start to fatigue a lot faster. So you might only get 2, maybe 3 sets in that strength phase. That's great. Use whatever you can get. Don't force yourself to have a lot of volume if you don't have the energy for it. There's no point to using a lot of volume when you're already starting to peter out after a couple hard sets. But at the same time, it makes no sense to limit yourself to 2 to 3 sets when after 2 to 3 sets, you're going gangbusters and you're like, I'm still feeling really good. Well, then don't stop. Keep going by all means. Don't limit yourself. No matter what number you pick, as this is the number of sets I always do, it's usually arbitrary and it's usually based on guesswork. I don't like basing my workouts on guesswork. I like doing what I can do and getting as much out of my workout as I can. And when we're basing it on arbitrary guesswork for how many sets we do or how long a rest period is supposed to be and whatnot, then you're leaving your results largely up to chance. So the flexible freestyle more approach of grind style calisthenics is more objective based, where you are doing however many sets you can get with a good degree of strength. And then once that strength starts to falter, then you go into your hypertrophy or your finisher phase where you're just burning out the muscle with a couple of good hard sets. So you're getting overall everything that you need in your workout in order to ensure the greatest chance of building the muscle and strength you want. You're building up your tension control, you're building up your stability, you're building up your strength, and then you're building up your endurance in that order. And whenever we're doing any sort of strength training that doesn't take advantage of all 4 of those, chances are we're going to have a weakness that's going to limit us somewhere along the line. It may not be a huge limitation, but it will be there. If your tension control is lacking, you're going to be limited no matter what. If your stability is not on point, particularly in your shoulders and your hips, not only are you much higher risk of injury, but you're just not going to be able to comfortably push yourself as much. If your strength training is not real strength training and you're doing much higher repetition stuff and you're doing it off of an arbitrary number of sets, then you're kind of just doing guesswork. And then if you're finishing off, but you're already just burning out your muscle trying to do strength training, you're kind of at odds with one another. You can't be strong and tired at the same time. If you're going for fatigue, you can't really get that much intensity. And if you're going after intensity, then you have to keep fatigue at bay. So that's why we have double phases in the GSC program, is let's program the workout so that way when we're going after strength, we're not having fatigue compromise that objective. And then when we're going after fatigue, we're not compromising our strength. So that way you're getting all wins and no downsides. Mariano, good to see you. I like the avatar. Beard's coming in nice, man. Looks good. Hey, Matt, I know you don't train in the morning, but any tips to wake up your brain and focus on training? Sometimes I train in the morning. I've been getting a little bit more training these days. With my dash here, I'll get up, and depends kind of if I need to be in the gym earlier versus later, but I'll at least get some hanging leg raises or something like that to wake things up. But one of the things that I don't know if this is true or not, it's just something I heard one time from someone. They said that one of the best ways to kind of wake up the brain is to get inverted. So practice like a handstand or a pike push-up or a downward dog position or a crow stand or anything like that can be a really good way to kind of wake up the brain and be like, oh, okay, this is happening. Wow, all right, I've got to pay attention. So I would recommend getting any sort of slight inverted action when you're warming up in your programs for the morning there. It can be very, very efficient and effective. Just make sure you're safe about it. Don't be like, super groggy and tired, and then you try and kick up into a handstand and you collapse and fall on your head. Let's see here. One other questions. Mariano got that. I know sometimes I miss a lot of people here as well. Good question on 5x5. Earth Light. Hey, Matt, any tips for a 5x5 weighted calisthenics program? I've been meaning to make a video on this. I really should get on that. Do you think that modality is enough volume-wise, or is a finisher phase necessary? No, I think 5x5 is one of those programs you just cannot go wrong with because it is a decent amount of volume. It's 25 total repetitions. And usually whenever you're looking at programs that are kind of going after strength, building muscle type of thing, you'll find that the volume is always kind of in that mid 20 rep range. 3x7, 3x10, 4x6, 6x4 kind of thing. You're always looking at things that end up with a total amount of volume somewhere around that range. So 5x5 is fantastic. Usually when you're selecting your exercises for that, what you want to do is for the first 2 sets, you want to feel like you're definitely saving a bit in the tank. It's heavy, but it's not gassing you out by any stretch. The 3rd set is usually something like, okay, that's getting fairly heavy. I'm starting to really feel it. And then the 4th and 5th set should be feeling like you're really pushing yourself to the limits of your capability. So that's kind of how you want to program the weight or the level of resistance that you are using. You shouldn't feel like you get to set number 3 and then you think, I've got to decrease my resistance in order to get through the other sets. You can always add a finisher, but always remember that you can always do more work. When it comes to strength training or particularly going for hypertrophy, you can always make your muscles more tired. You can always do more work. The question is always, is it just worth it? Because the more fatigue you pile on the body, the more recovery you're going to need. The more you're going to potentially also impede your muscular ability over the next couple of days. So if you do a 5x5 and then you do a finisher, like several finishers, what are your muscles going to be like for soccer practice the next day? Always kind of keep in mind that little aspect of what is this doing for my muscles over the next couple of days? And am I okay with that? Because we can always make our muscles more fatigued. We can always make them more tired, but more fatigue and exhaustion does not always correlate very well to more hypertrophy. There definitely seems to be this line in the sand where you want to create enough fatigue in the muscle to stimulate hypertrophy. But once you've created a certain amount, and Lord knows what that is, but usually it's after pushing yourself fairly hard for several sets, more fatigue probably doesn't do you a whole lot of good. It's like pulling the trigger on a gun. You pull it hard enough to fire the bullet, but then squeezing the trigger progressively harder doesn't make the bullet like fly faster or anything like that. So we want to be aware of when we're burning out. Usually what I'm looking for is just a precipitous downgrade in my force output. So if I'm doing a finisher phase and I'm doing like, say, push-ups after some heavy weighted dips, then I should feel like I do let's say 20 push-ups and I'm just banging them out real quick. And if I'm like, should I get one more? Maybe I can get one more. And then I'd get down on the floor and my arms would immediately be like, oh God, dude, no, we're not doing 20, maybe 10 if we're lucky. You want to feel that fatigue build up real fast. If you're like, yeah, I did a finisher phase of 15 push-ups and then 15 and then 15 and then 15 and then 15. No, you're not pushing that hard. Because when you are pushing yourself to a really good degree of fatigue, the amount of energy output you have on subsequent sets should really sharply drop off. And so that's what you're looking for in those finisher phases and those finisher sets. Just something to kind of keep in mind. Oh, I already addressed that one there. So we've got our 4 phases. We've got our programming. And again, all this details are in much more explanation in the book, Grind Style Calisthenics, down below. And there's the Grind Style Calisthenics playlist on the RDP YouTube channel. There's a lot of other resources. I know I'm just skimming over how Grind Style Calisthenics works. But the bottom line is that the whole system is geared towards helping you generate a heck of a lot more muscle tension and a lot more fatigue to stimulate both greater levels of strength and greater levels of fatigue for hopefully a higher degree of hypertrophy as well. And to finish off, we want to talk about how the flexible approach also is something that works best for you and your body. Because when it comes to how many sets you do, how many times a week are you working, what are the tools that you're working as well? What exercises are you employing to work a muscle group? You could really feel like you're getting your back much more effectively doing heavy single arm rows, for example, and don't really feel it too much in your back. Well, listen to that. All of the tools of Grind Style Calisthenics are about giving you options. They're about giving you the ability to take many different paths so you don't feel like you have to force yourself out of alignment using some sort of approach that someone else thought is better for you when it really isn't. And that is very key for building muscle, because whenever you talk to somebody who has successfully achieved most anything in fitness, but especially with building up their physique, you're inevitably going to find somebody who has experimented a little bit on their body and they've just followed whatever feedback their body was giving them. So they could be doing, pull-ups of a certain way, and they're like, I just don't feel like this is really hitting my back very well. I just don't feel it in my lats. But then they experience some other exercise like lat pull downs and suspension straps or something, like, wow, that really lights up my lats. Then they'll go with what their body's telling them. They're not going to just follow along with whatever rules or ideas that are out there. It's like, well, this is supposedly the best exercise for chest. I don't really feel it in my chest, but I'm just going to keep doing it because people say it's the best thing for the chest. Who cares what other people think? Listen to your body. GSC gives you lots of different tools. It gives you lots of different programming variations. It gives you a lot of flexibility to do things so that when your body's giving you feedback of this feels like it's working, this doesn't feel like it's working, you can adjust and adapt accordingly. And when we're too strict and dogmatic about our approaches, then we usually are pulling ourselves out of alignment, which not only compromises your results, but often just decreases motivation. You're not going to push yourself nearly as hard. Plus, it can even increase your risk of injury as well. So the flexible approach, I like to call it structured flexibility of GSC, is all about allowing you to create the best programs, methodology, and utilizing the techniques that work best for you. And when you're getting that valuable feedback from your body of what is working best, that's going to set you up to be a lot more successful in building up the physique you want. There's a lot of dogmatic ideas out there when it comes to training, especially in the world of calisthenics. But you don't need to apply rules that are not in alignment for you. I think it's really easy to forget sometimes that this whole fitness thing is a heck of a lot more open source than we realize. There are no, government overlords controlling how we're supposed to be doing exercise or fitness. There's no Illuminati of the calisthenics world issuing decrees on the proper way to program a workout or anything. What is in charge, of course, are the primary principles and the processes of mother and human nature. That's what is in charge. And of course, that's what I'll be diving much more into in my next book that I'm writing. But the point I'm trying to make is that when we are feeling like we're forcing ourselves into ways that just don't align for us, it's only going to compromise you. Nobody gets better results by, quote, being good and staying on the right path and doing what they're told. There was a plaque I saw the other day. I can't exactly remember what it was, but how it said, but it was something to the effect of people who do what they're told rarely change the world, or something to that effect. And I need to get that in my study or something, because it's true. If you're always doing what you're told, specifically, like this is the right way to eat, this is the right way to train, and you're ignoring your own feedback, you're literally closing yourself off from the very information that's telling you what you should be doing to get better results. But if you are listening to your body, it's like, I feel it better in the muscle if I do this, or, if I eat this way, I've got a lot more energy and stuff. That's going to lead you down a much stronger path. And GSC is all about giving you the options in order to make that happen. It's not about forcing you onto anything that's not going to be in your best interests, because ultimately you're the one in charge. You're the one who is steering this ship. So don't let me tell you what to do. All I've got is guidelines and ideas through the GSC program. That's all I can offer you. It's you who's actually in charge of what you should be doing. Aiden Ryan saying, I see YouTubers say jumping from workout to workout is bad or less effective for building muscle. What do you think? I've seen you recommend micro workouts, just doing whatever you feel on the day. Very good question on this one. So it depends on what you're changing. Now, remember, your results depend on what you're doing on the fundamental level of your training. What are your muscles fundamentally doing? So you can change and have a lot of variety in your workouts and still fundamentally keep things intact. I've got a lot of clients where we haven't done the same exact workout in years, 2 times in a row, just because they like the variety. But I use my scoreboard progression log to make sure that they're staying on track, because we're still doing pull-ups. We're still keeping to the basic fundamental movement patterns. We're still doing push, pull, squat. We're not changing a whole lot. We're changing just more of the superficial details, where people are like, I don't know, his shoulders aren't feeling so great for dips today. Okay, progressive push-ups then. Yeah, that sounds good. It's still progressive pushing. It really isn't all that different. So it may look like it's very different, but it's not. However, a lot of times what does end up happening is people will change things on a fundamental level, even though they think it's the same. So this happens a lot where someone would be like bench pressing and they'd be doing, let's say again, like 5x5. So they're going pretty heavy. And then they decide, I'm going to get into bodyweight training. And they have the goal of trying to do 100 push-ups. Well, fundamentally, you just totally changed everything around, because yes, you're still doing the same movement pattern, but the intensity that you're working at is completely different. You went from very high intensity style training with 5x5 to very low intensity style training with trying to do 100 reps of something. So then people get different results and they're like, oh, calisthenics didn't work for me. No, you changed what you were doing on the fundamental level. So the bottom line is you can change your workouts and your training and what exercise you're doing 100 different ways, and it's perfectly fine to do that. Yes, when we're looking at designing a program, there is a lot to be said for getting your body used to an exercise. You want your body to get used to an exercise. You want to improve that proficiency. And I know a lot of times people out there will say, oh, you don't want to get used to your workout. You don't want to get used to the exercise and stuff. That's nonsense. The whole point of training is to get used to it. If you're not training to get used to the exercise or the workout, you're wasting your time. You want to get comfortable with it. You want to be proficient at it. And you're not going to improve your proficiency if you're not getting comfortable with it or used to it. Think of learning anything else. Imagine if you were learning how to play the piano, and after a week, the teacher was like, okay, today we learn saxophone. And then after a week, okay, today we're going to learn the xylophone or something else. And it's always changing 100 different ways. It's like, I just can't get a bead on what I'm trying to learn and practice. But if you sit down to the piano and you practice the piano over and over and over, and you get it to the point where you can play a piece on the piano and your fingers know where to go without even thinking about it, that's how you become a good pianist. It's the exact same thing with any type of physical development as well. You want to feel like you own these techniques. So use variety as you see fit. By all means, change things around however you like. If you feel like doing something else is going to be more effective or just feel better, then go for it. But don't forget that when we're doing this, we want to become masters of push-ups, masters of the pull-ups. You should grab onto that pull-up bar and feel like it is just one with you, that it's something you're so used to doing, because once you get to that level, then you can more easily level yourself up. So changing things too much on a fundamental level, yes, that can be bad. And a lot of times people are like, they're changing things up without any real reason or rhyme or reason or purpose to it. I'm a big fan of changing things up, but change with purpose. Like I said earlier, I was doing dips, didn't really feel so good in the shoulders, but push-ups are good. Okay, there's a reason to change. But a lot of times people are changing just for willy-nilly whatever, and they're looking for that thing that's going to produce the result they want a lot faster than it probably will come about. And in that case, you're just randomly wandering around. And I know the old saying, not all who wander are lost, but yeah, some people really are lost and they don't know where they're going, and they're not going to get anywhere if you have too much of that. So change is necessary, but it's not necessarily something that you want to avoid either. Nashkan saying, do you have to work out every day? Well, no. I mean, think about it this way. There's actually no such thing as exercise or working out. It's a fictitious thing. We made it up. It's like unicorns and, things that, I can't think of an analogy. My brain's tired. Sorry. But the bottom line is, all we're doing when we're exercising is we're taking the fundamental process of stimulus and adaptation and directing it. So as I'm moving my hand like this is training. This is training my body to do this for whatever reason, right? Our bodies are always training. They're always adapting to everything that we're doing, even if it's literally just sitting down. So when you're exercising and training, You're just saying, I want you to train and adapt in this direction. That's all exercise does. It doesn't actually do anything. All it does is take that process that's already happening and directs it. So when it comes to training every day, technically you already are. You're already training. Your body's always training 24/7. The only question is, are you directing it? Do you have to direct it every day? No, not at all. But at the same time, it's not hard to do it every single day, because all it takes to create a stimulus is something, anything at all. That's what my book Micro Workouts is about. When you understand that the whole point of exercise is not to work hard, but to create a stimulus, you can create a stimulus just hanging from that pull-up bar for 10 seconds. Stretches you out, opens up the shoulders, improves your grip strength. Great, awesome. Did my training for today. So that's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of train every single day, just because you're directing that process, and it takes almost nothing to do it to some degree. But no, you don't have to train every day because you already are. You're just doing it on purpose or not. Mariano, hey Matt, do you follow the NBA playoffs? And if so, what do you think in the USA about the number of high-level international players? Yeah, funny you should mention that, because our Denver Nuggets are in the finals for the first time ever. So things here in Denver are quite exciting with the Nuggets beating out LeBron and the Lakers. But no, I've never been a big basketball fan. I've never followed them a whole lot. But yeah, you're talking about multi-billion-dollar businesses. That's what these teams are. And so, like any business, if you can get talent from other countries and other areas of the world to improve your business, then great, go for it. Yeah, it's something that is very competitive. It's something that can be hard to do, of course, but I don't see anything wrong with it. It's just simply recruiting talent when and where you can find it. Cynthia is coming on saying, I've been doing static holds for my chin-ups, dips, push-ups. Can I do this for a while? Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, static holds are great. They're a wonderful way to really dial in some of that neuromuscular proficiency with some of the exercises. I do this with pull-ups all the time, because lots of times people have weakness in their pull-ups, and I'll be like, all right, top position, drive the shoulders down and back, pack the shoulders, elbows in tight. A lot of people have trouble being able to do that in a dynamic fashion. But when you apply that in a static isometric approach with pull-ups, it gets dialed in real fast. It's also very humbling, because people will be like, oh yeah, I could do 20 pull-ups and everything. This is easy. And then you hold that static position for even 10 seconds and you see the look on their face just be like, oh boy, like this is really hard. This is not easy in the slightest. So I love the static stuff. I wouldn't say that's what you want to always do, only that, but it's certainly a very valuable tool in the toolbox to be using things that are going to make you more proficient. SK is saying, so why is GSC better than just gradually adding reps and weight to your calisthenics movements? Very good question. So our ability to progress is fine. You're talking about kind of more of a linear progression style, where you're adding reps and then you can add weight. If you're doing weighted calisthenics, you're using things that are more challenging, like archer push-ups and things like that. And that works great. That's fine. But I've been training people for 20 years, and I very rarely have ever met anybody who is like, oh yeah, I follow a regular rep and weight progression model, and it's been working great for the past several years, and it's gotten me where I want to go. It's very rare for that to actually work out that way. And the reason is simple. It's because a lot of times people have poor neuromuscular proficiency, which is one of those things that's largely governed by our subconscious. So to a large degree, we're not aware of it. We're not fixing it. And as I said earlier, if you don't have that, or it doesn't get better, nothing you do will ever work. So that's why people are like, oh yeah, it's real simple. You just start off with 10 push-ups and then you do 12 push-ups and 13, and you just keep adding reps. Or you're doing like weighted dips and you just add weight and so on. It sounds great on paper, but it just doesn't play out in reality. And people will send me emails saying I can do 5 pull-ups and I just can't do more than 5 pull-ups, because we've got it backwards. Your ability to get bigger and stronger doesn't come from doing more repetitions. That's the result of getting bigger and stronger. And so if you can do 5 pull-ups, you're not going to get bigger and stronger trying to do more repetitions, because you can only do 5 repetitions, and you're going to always do 5 repetitions, and you're never going to do more, and you're never going to get bigger and stronger because you're stuck there. What you need to do is you need to be able to improve your neural drive so that way you do get stronger, and that way you can add repetitions as a result of the progress, not the cause of it. So the whole point of GSC is to make sure that we're closing those gaps and not having those shortcomings hold you back. The neuromuscular proficiency, the stability, make sure you're focusing on building strength, because especially in calisthenics, that really hurts a lot of people, where people will be like, yeah, here's my routine. I'm doing 20 repetitions, 15 repetitions, 30. It's like, where's the heavy stuff, dude? Where are you doing stuff that you might be able to get 5 reps on a good day? That would be arguably the pull-up there. Okay, great. But then where's the light stuff? So we often fall into one of the several categories. It's like, I'm always training heavy. I'm always training for strength. I'm like, okay, good. But it's really hard to push the muscle to a high degree of fatigue when you're stuck doing an exercise you can only do for a few seconds or for a few repetitions. GSC is a much more holistic approach to ensure that you're covering all of your bases. And if your approach is, I'm just going to add weight and reps, you're probably going to hit a limit a lot faster, and it's not going to clear up anytime soon, as many of us unfortunately find. And usually when people hit those limits, that's when they start program hopping. That's when they start just doing random stuff, and they just end up wandering around pretty lost because they don't have the ability to tap into the exact thing that's holding them back. Long answer, but that's essentially why, because that can work out great, the adding weight and reps sort of thing. But unfortunately, a lot of people discover it doesn't work very well, especially in the long term, for that type of linear progression. And finally, to finish off, Jules coming on. Are you aware of any ways that improve neurologic drive connection externally and naturally? Herbs, berries, etc. Or do you recommend mind-muscle connection improvement? Yeah, mind-muscle connection improvement. You're not going to ingest anything that's going to improve that sort of thing. It has to be trained directly, which is why the isometrics are particularly effective for the warm-up in GSC. And strength training in particular, the heavier stuff, is also a good way of going about that. It's something you have to place the demand on the nervous system directly. You're not going to be able to kind of go about it with a secondary way. I've experimented a lot of times with other methodologies of trying to improve that neural drive, and it kind of sort of maybe, I guess, works after many months sort of thing. But that's why I fell right into the isometric training right away, because I noticed that I made far more neuromuscular proficiency improvements with 2 days of the isometrics than I had in the previous 2 years of using any other methods. So that's why the isometrics is in GSC as a warm-up, because it is far more effective than anything else that we can do, because it is directly training that nervous system. It is directly training your ability to create tension in the muscle in a synergistic way. And it also has the benefit of just having that direct application too, because at the end of the day, that neuromuscular proficiency has to be coming from that neural drive. So we have to train that neural drive directly. And anything you're trying to do to improve that neural drive in a very roundabout fashion, even if it does work, you still need to improve that neural drive in that application anyway. So that's a good question. Very, very good. And I very much appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much, Jules. But anyway, I am going to fade off here, folks. I've got some more work to do and go out into the world. And thank you so much, everybody, for watching/listening. Again, the audio for this will be uploaded to the podcast directory of your choice. If you missed anything or you want to hear the audio feedback, as always. And thank you so much for your questions. I sincerely do appreciate it. Don't forget the links all down below for the GSC program, the Dynamic Pull-Up Handles, micro workouts, Overcoming Isometrics book for that as well. Lots of different resources that I talked about here today. Check those out. Let me know if you have any questions, reddeltaproject@gmail.com, that I can answer for you. But I hope you have a great week and best of luck with your training. Be fit and live free.